Back in the day, the Eldar knew how to party. They partied so hard that they manifested the chaos god of pleasure, excess, and decadence. That's pretty metal. 80s and 90s metal was a big deal for me growing up. Bands like Guns N' Roses, Motley Crue, Skid Row, and Warren were all heavy sources of inspiration. Yes, even down to the leather pants and cowboy boots. Before I was a shitty miniature painter, I was a shitty guitarist. So yeah, we're doing 80s elves. Alright, let's get these helmets out of the way. Primed black, and I'm just shooting a bit of company grey over, and then a little bit of matte white. With the matte white, I'm just concentrating more on the foreheads, just to kind of pop that face out. Because we're shooting for tabletop standard, I'm just going to brush over with some Battleship Grey speed paint. Let it collect in all the recesses a little bit, and we'll get a really nice, slightly off blue tint. This is the easiest white recipe that's ever really existed, to be honest, and remember this because we're going to be using it on all the other details for the Guardians later. But for now, we're going to need every single fluorescent that the army painter has in the air range. Fluorescents can be a bit of a pain in the ass to work with, and I am shooting it through the airbrush. It's probably the easiest way to get coverage on something like this when you're going for the entire model. And even then, it's going to take 2 or 3 coats to really build up the opacity. Fluorescents are incredibly transparent, no matter which brand you go to. But I find the Army Painter Air range is probably the easiest ones to work with. To build up a little contrast, now I'm just going to shoot over with a different color. This one right here is just the blue flux, and I'm going to shoot this from an under. So it's not really going to be an underglow, but it's going to set in all of our shadows. But we're not just stopping with pink. Oh no, we're going through the entire range. The whole aim for the Guardians is I kind of want that 80s ski suit look. If you can imagine a fluorescent Power Ranger, that's basically what we're going to end up with here. The blue is probably one of the most transparent, so it's going to take a couple of extra layers to build up the opacity to really get that vibrance. And then I'm just using magenta as the shadow tone from underneath, and that's actually going to pull together, create some purples and a little bit more interest. Neon yellow, I'm going to do essentially the same thing with. I'm shooting yellow from the top, and then it's going to be magenta again from the bottom. You might have noticed some of the models already have a pre-undershade of magenta, and it was just a little bit. I just wanted to see if it would work, if I could save time while I already had the airbrush loaded. And yes, it does work, but I kind of wanted just a little bit extra on there, so I shot some afterwards as well. For the yellow, you could obviously also use the orange. Now the green. The green played around with my white balance a fair bit, and I'm not the best color grader in videos. If you've seen any of these videos, you know that videography is not my shtick. In real life, after a few more coats on this green, it is actually a lot deeper and a lot more vibrant. And then for the undershadow, I'm actually going with a blue. The blue that blends in here with the greens, sometimes you'll get a little bit of a darker shadow if you're going to pump a little extra blue in there. Other times it's going to blend in, and that transition is going to be a really, really nice teal. And now finally the orange. For the orange, I actually highlighted this also with magenta, and it's a recipe that I'm going to keep in mind for future videos. It takes quite a while to build up, but after you get the orange on there and you start shooting at magenta, it gets a really, really hot burning orange. This is a recipe I'm going to keep in the back pocket for when I grab some more fire dragons, because it's pretty dope. After this, it was lunchtime. Nothing crazy, just some pizza. And that time away is also going to give everything a little bit of time to dry, and now we're back to that same white recipe. For this, we're basically just going to go over all the shurikens and little extra details that they may have, coat it down with the white, and go over again with that Battleship Grey. Just like any other speed paint, you kind of want this to pull just a little bit in the recesses, but you don't want to flood it. I went back just with a little bit of edge highlighting, just to give it a little extra pop and a little extra detail, and honestly, we're not doing a great deal to these Guardians. A little Hydra Turquoise to pick out some of the Spirit Stones and our little details, and the little strappy straps on the boots. This was essentially just to give it its third color, so you know, we're ready to go for the tabletop and get those sweet 10 points. If you wanted to add more to this, it's an easy thing to do. You can go in with some panel lining or some more edge highlighting, but I want to get these done so I can get to the bikes. Grab some hairspray in your sister's jeans, because we're about to rock this motherfucker. I'm not gonna lie, the entire reason I picked the Aeldari Combat Patrol box this month was specifically so I could do this on the bikes. From a white base coat, we're basically just gonna start putting in that hot fluorescent pink, and we're gonna shift to the blue, but we want, again, that super saturation. So a few coats, try and leave some space as much as you can, because that blue will pop and you will get some transitions between the two. And trust me, as much as the colors separate are awesome, those transitions for what we're going to do next, that really makes this. As long as you have some big patches of both colors, this is going to work. I wouldn't be too concerned with what the actual pattern itself looks like because we're doing something completely different. This is pretty far away from the end result, so just trust the process on this one. Because now we need pinstriping tape. This is just 3mm tape that I pulled out from the automotive store. If you wanted to use something that's a little bit more hobby specific, something like the Tamiya tape, 100% go and do that. I like this just because it's incredibly low tack and I know that it's not going to pull up any of the paint when I take it off. On the flip side, low tack tape can be pretty frustrating to work with, so that is completely up to you. Try a couple of different tapes, see what you like, see what works out the best. From here on out, it's actually a really simple process. We're going to put some matte black into that airbrush and we're just going to shoot over everything. This is going to clean up all that overspray and really pull it back in for the next step. But back to this tape deal. If you're going to use a tape that's a little bit stickier, a little bit more tack, I'd probably recommend shooting it with some varnish before you start taping it down. It's just going to give that paint a little bit more protection from tearing and keep it nice and clean. Calamuching and cleaning's harder with the airbrush. Are you ready for the best bit? I need a cigarette after that, but now we're going into the next step with Wasteland Clay, because as awesome as the stripes are, I think it needs just that little bit extra ridiculousness to really put it into the 80s. And what's more 80s than animal print? So now we're going to grab some of that matte black and start some Leopard Print. Leopard Print is actually quite simple. All we're really doing is making little C shapes or little crescent shapes and a couple of little splotches in between. I found the best thing to do is make sure you actually have space between the design. Another key factor is actually also paint consistency. Because we don't really want to go over this for a second time, we want the paint just that little bit thicker, but we also need it flowing so it doesn't kind of dry out. Now, this is something that you'll probably have to work out for yourself of what's the best consistency of how you work. After we've done the entire surface of the Wasteland Clays with our little markings, we're going to go with Rudy Umber and just start putting in just little tiny brown dots inside of those crescent shapes. If you find that you've splotched anywhere that you don't want paint, just go back with some Wasteland Clay. You can tidy that back up and make it all nice and tidy again. And of course, you'll always do one better than the other. Time for some target print. Now, we're just starting over with that same Wasteland Clay, and I'm taking Burning Ore, which is just a really vivid orange, and I'm just going to give it some really thin coats. I really just want to tint the sides more so than kind of covering everything. It's going to give us a natural tiger looking gradient. Now, I found the secret for me for tiger stripes is symmetry, which is going to be something key to remember here when we move on to the next pattern. So with tiger stripes, I like to do one big one and then have little forks and little offshoots, as well as just some that don't quite make it across. And again, you want to keep some space here. You don't want to clog up everything with tiny, minute little lines that are all crammed up into one space, because you're not going to sell the effect. Keep it big, keep it wide, and keep it bold. The forking in some of these stripes is what really actually kind of starts to sell it. But you don't want to overshoot that. I find every second stripe, if you want to add a little fork to it, do that. Now, we're going to flip over to the other side and somewhat copy what we've done on the first side. So if you can try and keep all those shapes of squiggles in roughly the same position, that's really going to help this. But this is also why you want to leave a lot of space, because if you started to add too much on the other side, it's going to look really clogged up and messy. After we're done mirroring each side, I'm going to take a little bit more of that black and add some squiggles to the middle. Now this is what's going to really kind of push it all together, and instead of looking like two different sides, it's going to make it look like one cohesive pattern. Zebra print time! We're swapping out the Wasteland Clay for Company Grey and a little bit of Barren Blue, so I've mixed just a tiny bit in here just to get a cold off-white feeling to it. And then down the center, we're going to move over to that straight Company Grey and just give us a little bit cleaner, more bold, closer to white. And we only want a gentle gradient here, so we don't really have to make everything stick out, because we all know the real hero to this style is the print. After painting a bunch of these, I found the difference between tiger stripes and zebra stripes is not that massive. We're going to be using the same ideas as far as the forking branches in the print and then the few little squiggles just randomly out there by themselves. But we're not going to be worrying about trying to mirror this image. We don't really want it to look like it's two different sides. If you wanted to do a white tiger, 100% go out, mirror the sides and just change that Wastelands clay to this white mix. You can see a little bit what I've done here. Every time I have a fork, I have just a flat stripe right next to it. It's that little bit of variation that's really going to pull apart between the tiger and the zebra print. And yes, for brushes, I'm using something with a really fine point and it's 00 gauged. And not that you actually see this, but this was day 2, so it's time for another lunch. This time, chili dogs. Now for the last model in this video, the Farseer. Taking matte white, I'm just going to start blocking in a few details. I want maximum contrast and maximum vibrancy for what I'm going for here. I want a way that this stands out as a character, something special, but also ties into all the other Guardians. And we're still staying within the realms of tabletop standard. Everything that we've done in this video can be easily replicated and quickly replicated if we're looking at doing an entire army. Just remember, when you're working with white straight over a black, there's not a lot of times that you're going to get a one coat coverage. Now, the Fnatic paints definitely help in this, but concentrate more on the application. You want a smooth application so you can go back in and cover it again. And now here's how we're going to make it fit in with all the other Guardians. We basically have a rainbow of Guardians, so we're going to have a rainbow of a Farseer. And after all that time spent on the Guardians and working out how to use fluorescent paints and build up an opaque coverage, this one's going to be pretty easy. The other thing I'm going to be using to our advantage is the overspray. Now, when you're using an airbrush, unless you're masking and taping everything off, it's unavoidable. But when you're building up fluorescence layer by layer, especially over something like a black or any other color to be honest, it's going to actually look like glow. And I'll show you how to tidy that up and make it look like it was intentional in just a little while. After we've worked down our rainbow, I'm going to start picking out the faceplate. Now this is just that exact same white recipe that I used for the helmets. It's going to be that first company grey mix, then we come in with the battleship grey contrast paint. And a little bit of hot pink for the eyes because it looks kind of dope. But we also need to bring back some of that ridiculousness. So we're going to bring in Wastelands clay one more time and fire off with some more Leopard Print. Something else that's working to our advantage is that we have a flat black cloak, which means after we paint in some of this Wasteland clay, we can go back and just neaten up some of these lines. You can work back and forward as many times as you need as long as you keep it nice and thin and everything can be nice and neat. For the trim, because it is a little bit thinner, I can't go as wild as I did with the patterns just like on the Windriders. So these ones are going to be the exact same shapes, but they're just going to be that little bit bigger. I'm going to leave a little bit more space between them and I'm going to make the actual prints bigger as well. After we finish up on those stripes, we're going to head over to that singing spear. We've done the RGB Blade on a few different models now, and I still got questions about how we do it and how we build it up, so let's do it one more time. White edge highlight over a flat black, and you can tidy up as you go, keep it nice and neat. For this one though, we are going to be using the fluorescents with a brush. Now this is going to take a couple of coats as well, and remember you want to stay nice and smooth. This is going to probably take 2 to 3 coats for each color, but that also kind of works in because you can spill over the sides a little bit on every layer and you'll actually start to create a nice blend. After that, we're going to come back with our flat black and start cleaning up the edges. Getting rid of that overspill is going to make it look like you know what you're doing. Sticking with that black, we're going to add just a little bit of the stabilizer to thin it down and paint it into all the recesses on the cloak to actually make it look like it's light and not just overspray. Now I know what you're thinking, we're missing a model from the Aeldari Combat Patrol, we're missing the Wraith Lord. But I've actually got some bigger plans for that one and it's going to get a video all to itself. I'm going to be showing you how I completely repose the model and give it an entirely different look, and hell, I use them as Wraith Seers. I just need one more way of swinging that big D cannon up the battlefield. Now I've got to admit, this whole time that I've been painting these, every time I finish something, I check out all my old Eldar and I think I'm going to repaint the entire lot just like this. Because hell, this was a lot of fun and that's all Warhammer painting has to be. As always, a massive thank you to InGames, the Army Painter, and all of our Patreon heretics. Big love, see you next time.